of Iraq and Syria, you had party dictatorships based on Baath's philosophy, which is a combination of Arab nationalism and some elements of communism. It's a very hodgepodge, nobody ever figured it out, but it was an authoritarian rule. So this was the political scenario at that time. In the meantime, from the 1970s onwards, there were important and significant changes in regard to the oil economy. And the oil producers demanded a fair price for their oil. So oil which had till then, cheap oil which had till then, which was the basis of the development of the West in terms of being an advanced society, that cheap oil was not as cheap as it had been earlier. And there was a demand, and slowly the price went up from $2 to $4 to $8. And since then, the producers have to some extent been influencing the trend of oil prices. But the West didn't lose out in this scenario, because as they got more and more oil revenues into the producers' countries, you then needed to upgrade your countries and bring them to the modern world on the basis of new infrastructure. So you then brought in all these Western companies to create this new modern environment. And much of the oil money then went back to Western countries in that regard. But at the same time, even then when you had surpluses, there was no financial setup anywhere in the world where you could store this money. And therefore it went back to Western financial institutions. So the West did rather well out of the increased oil prices. Then you had the problem of Israel. Israel had emerged in 1948, the Arab armies were defeated, they were once again defeated in 1967. So the Arabs felt a deep sense of personal failure, that not only did they have a political order that was way behind all the evolutions that had taken place in the rest of the world, that they had defeat upon defeat inflicted upon them, and at the same time they had rulers who subserved other people's interests rather than their own. But what was of great significance, which affected each and every person in the region, it was the economic malaise. The economic malaise was that this world order, this political order set up across West Asia did not provide for the kind of economic success that would have given some stake to some people in maintaining that order, that they would allow the maintenance of that order. This was, over a period of time, it became what is called crony capitalism, where you had a small coterie of people around the despot who benefited primarily from the economic achievements of that society, and large numbers of people were excluded from it. So this is the scenario that prevailed. Deep sense of failure and loss of control over destiny, which were particularly galling for people who were otherwise very proud and who had seen such extraordinary success till a couple of centuries ago. A deep sense of political failure and a pervasive economic malaise. Defeat upon defeat, disgrace upon defeat, a sense of being totally marginalized, which meant, really speaking, a loss of personal dignity for an entire people. Obviously, as foreign travel became easier and interactions and connectivities became more common, more and more of these people compared themselves with the successes of other societies that had started on the same basis as they had, but they had done very well for themselves. Many of them looked at India, for example. India had become a democracy and a secular system right from 1947 onward. It had a constitution, it had free elections, it had changes of government, and from the 1990s it also had remarkable economic success. That means in a democratic and secular order, you were able to have economic success as well. We could then tackle the problem of poverty and bring more and more people out of the poverty trap. This was visible to people. They saw various other countries that were becoming increasingly important role players in world affairs and felt totally excluded and left out. In this environment, one answer that emerged at that time was that of radical Islam. Radical Islam itself took birth in Afghanistan. The jihad was put together by three very cynical countries motivated by very short-term tactical interests. United States, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan decided that the Afghan national struggle should become a global jihad. And thousands of young people from across the Muslim world and across the Muslim communities in different parts of the world gathered at the Pak-Afghan border. It is said that between 82 and 92, more than 100,000 Muslims from every Muslim community and country, bar two, had come to the Pak-Afghan border, had been indoctrinated in radicalism and jihad, had been trained in arms and subversion, and some of them had been sent out to fight as well. But what was the consequence of this jihad? It was extraordinary. None of the fathers, none of the countries that had fathered this jihad had thought about what might happen. The jihad was victorious. This was the first great victory of Muslim people over the West. That not only did the Soviet Union withdraw from Afghanistan as a result of jihadi effort, the country itself disintegrated. At that stage, these radicals argued that the good Lord had now come back on the side of the Muslims and that jihad should be the weapon in order to win back what the Muslim people have lost. That they have lost their dignity and their freedom. And the way to achieve it is to take up arms against the West, and then you have the near enemy, your own leaders, who are subservient to the West. So two enemies were then identified, the near enemy, which is your own leaders, and the far enemy, which is Israel and the United States. This is the unintended consequence of the jihad. This jihad expanded in ferocity and range, ultimately culminating in the events of 9/11. Do recall that 9/11 happened precisely because three countries of this of the world decided to mobilize Islam as a weapon against communism and paid a very, very heavy price for it. All three of them have paid a very heavy price. Unfortunately, the international community, including India, have also paid the same price as well. So you had a series of violent acts by radical Islam in the name of jihad, in the name of the fact that the good Lord is back on your side. And this continued till about 2005, 2006. By the time you come to about 5 or 6 years after 9/11, there is a sense that jihad no longer had the popular resonance that it might have had earlier. That people were a little fatigued by this mindless violence against very innocent people, women and children and men being killed day after day, large numbers of Muslims being killed. In non-Muslim societies, there was the image of the ugly Musliman. And more than a third of Muslims in the world live more than a third of them live as minorities in non-Muslim countries. So they started sensing the development of a possible Islamophobia. And therefore there was a sense that yes, while our grievances are legitimate, we have legitimate grievances against our own leaders as well as against the West for having harmed us continuously over several decades. Radicalism and violence is not the answer. Certainly it is not serving any of our interests. Therefore you would say that for the last few years of the first decade of the 21st century, there was an intellectual vacuum in the Arab world. That while the grievances were legitimate, nothing was available to redress the scenario. Simultaneously, even as you had all these grievances, various reports started emerging about the parlous political and economic conditions in which people lived. The first Arab Human Development Report came out in 2002, written by Arab scholars, who said that the Arab world was today far, far behind in political, economic and social terms as compared to many other societies in the world, including many African societies. they pointed out three deficits. The deficit in terms of the political order, deficit in terms of the empowerment of women, and deficit in terms of the development of an